We're taking all the best old school wisdom and blending it with the top new school methods to bring you the optimal coaching strategies. This is the 80-20 Baseball Podcast with Coach Bo.
It is good to be here this week with all of you, the 80-20 baseball community. Our goal is to give all of you a confident, clear path to go out there and be a great coach, to go out there knowing exactly what you need to do, or at least have a clear, concise path to being a great coach, to going out there very confident, knowing what you're using is going to work, and not just work, it's going to work very well. I got some good news. I am recording an interview tomorrow with Coach Ryan Brucker. Now, of course, that name's probably not going to ring a bell with most of you, but trust me, it is going to have a bunch of golden information come out of it. I know it. I scripted out 10 questions specifically for Coach Brucker that I truly believe that these questions are going to get the information out from his massively intelligent baseball mind and coaching mind. And in a way, the answer should come across in a way that are very relatable and usable by all of you. So I'm fired up. I really try my best to write questions that are actionable and usable by all of you. Of course, he's going to give us a little bit of his background story. I think that's important, but we're really going to get into what he recommends for youth coaches, his tips, his strategies, and this is a successful coach that I can vouch for 100%. So I'll do that recording tomorrow, and hopefully we can have that live by next week, at least part one of that episode. You're going to want to hear what he says because the information is going to be usable and actionable by all of you. I also lined up another interview that I'll record in July. I'm really excited about this one. We'll talk about that down the road. Let's get into this week's episode. I'm going to go over 5 training pieces of equipment. I'm going to share them out with you that I recommend. One of them that's very popular. I'll talk really quickly about how to better use it than actually prescribed. And I'm going to share out the huge benefit of having a process. So recently I've been talking about how I believe being married to the process is not the way to go. Definitely not the way to go in my opinion, but being married to the desired result, the clear results that you want, and then fixing and adjusting and testing the process out to get you there, adjusting it, improving it to get you there, pivoting sometimes. But I'm going to share with you a mental game strategy or a reason that can help the mental game for your players by having a process, by them each having a process/routine. I'm going to get into that. And then the Dodgers. We all know the LA Dodgers. They're my favorite team, but I like baseball. I like all good teams. I watch highlights and I watch games of all sorts. I'm all about baseball. Doesn't matter where it's from, who's playing. I like quality baseball. The Dodgers have a very talented team. They're a very talented lineup. Everybody knows that. But they have a huge hitting flaw across almost their entire lineup. And this is something we can learn from. This is something that we can all learn from as coaches and not let our lineup do it. This is their Achilles heel. And I listened to their manager say something the other day. It was talking about and I don't think they know exactly what's going on with that lineup, but to me, it's very clear across the board where their huge hitting flaw is across their lineup. And this is something you see in youth, but you see all across baseball. I just see it through 1 through 9 with the Dodgers. It's shocking that it's that way. The Dodgers are all about sabermetrics. They're all about the math for the most part. I know they have quality coaches in their organization that are teaching skill development and things, in the trenches. But at the end of the day, what drives their process, what drives their organization is the math. And there's a flaw with that. Now, I'm a huge math. I'm a huge sabermetric. I'm a huge analytic. I love the data. I love it as evidence, but you cannot be all in and only on that side of the equation when it comes to coaching. There's a huge flaw. And what it does is it prevents, in my opinion, them from seeing things live, things that are going on in the very present moment. Talked about this before, in-game decisions. The data can't tell you in-game decisions at that very moment, sometimes as much as your intuition. The Dodgers have a huge flaw, and I think their sabermetric all math mindset or heavy math, heavy data numbers driven approach is hurting them. But hey, the good news is y'all can learn from this, and we're going to learn how not to make this mistake. Training equipment, pitching machines. I saw a question online. It was, hey, pitching machines, is pitching machines good or throwing batting practice? Or I think pitching machines are not as good as a live arm insofar as the person that's throwing live batting practice throws consistently over the plate and can actually throw a decent decent pitch, okay, assuming that the coach or another player can throw a good pitch, can throw a good batting practice, then that's the ideal way to go about it. A pitching machine is the next best. I think a pitching machine is better than underhand toss. I think it's better than a tee. I really like a tee. I've explained that. If you joined us for the fall coaching webinar clinic, I explained exactly the station and how I would use the hitting tee in a station for every batting practice. But at the end of the day, a pitching machine is not as good as a live arm, but it's better than underhand toss or definitely side toss. It's better than a tee in my opinion overall. I do think the tee has a place. So the question was from a coach, and it was a great question. Hey, pitching machine, do you recommend it? Should we not use pitching machines? Well, one of the problems with pitching machines, well, the two main obviously glaring issues is cost. Pitching machines aren't necessarily cheap. And two, power. You need a power source, so running extension cords out or having power at a field can be problematic, can be a challenge, and having a cord across the field can cause a few issues there. But ideally, you'd have a live arm, then a pitching machine, and then toss. I don't like underhand toss at all. I'll get into that sometime. I've broken it down way back when on some episodes. I don't like underhand toss unless you can't, as a coach or a dad, or a mom, get your arm above you can't throw overhand at all. Unless you can't lift your shoulder because of some crazy lifelong injury, you should be throwing overhand toss, even if you're sitting on a bucket. We could explain the physics of it just are enough right there with the pitch angle and things like that should just say, hey, this isn't authentic as much to a game as it should be. Here's the thing. Pitching machine, the ideal pitching machine, and I think the ideal pitching machine, and when I say ideal, they're actually out there. There actually are pitching machines that are like $5,000, $6,000. Of course, that's out of range for almost everybody. But outside of programs, maybe a high school program that fundraises or a college program, okay, major league teams, yeah, they have those. But a pitching machine, the gold standard is a pitching machine that randomizes the pitches to match that level of competition. It randomizes it in a ratio that's fairly accurate, especially to an upcoming opponent, starting pitcher, etc. And if they could even do it, and I've seen this years ago, it was like 20 years ago, I saw this at a baseball facility. It did not have a randomized pitching machine. It just threw fastballs, but it did have the pitch come out of a projector screen. And of course, that projector screen, the hole in the projector screen was where the release point of the pitcher was. So you got to see, now it wasn't three-dimensional, of course, it was two-dimensional, but you could see the pitcher and you could time the pitcher on this big projection screen at the end of the hitting tunnel, and then the pitch would come out. It was a straight fastball, but nonetheless, the ideal thing would be a virtual reality I think is the way to go long-term. I'm a big fan of that. I've hit on virtual reality. I don't like virtual reality for kids, like spending a lot of time in virtual reality, like going off for 3 or 4 hours and doing virtual reality. And I don't think that's going to lead to a lot of good places for our society. But I do think virtual reality can be very advantageous for certain things, especially skill development, and not just hitting, but in driving or flying planes, not just simulators, but literally VR, things like that. But VR has a little ways to go. And I've talked about that. There's a few limitations, even now with some of these companies, there's a few limitations that don't quite give it the authentic feel. And that's important. Now, I'm not getting into VR now, even though it has training equipment, but pitching machines, if you can get one, if you can go to a place that has randomized pitching machines, or you can adjust it, especially if you can randomize it on the back, they have these that you can computer, change the numbers around. You can change the velocity. You can change the pitch type and the ratio. If you can get to a place that has that might be worth your investment, especially during the season or the day before a game for your kid. It's not going to be cheap. I get it, but that might be worth the investment. Or maybe you can go in with a group of people, maybe some families, and you can say, hey, we're going to get this and we're going to use it. I don't know. Sometimes that can be a problem. But if you can get a hold of one of those pitching machines that randomizes the pitches and does all the different pitches, wow, that would be great. Now, if you could even have somebody out there kind of mimicking the pitching delivery, that's where the problem gets in with pitching machines in general. Is hitting is a lot about timing. It's a lot about timing. If you talk to hitting coaches, they'll talk a lot about timing, being on time. Well, being on time starts when the pitcher starts moving, starts their delivery, not necessarily right when they let go of the ball. Now, it varies. Each hitting coach is going to say it a little different, but it definitely is nice to see when the pitcher starts the delivery, and out of a pitching machine, you just see the ball spit out of the hole of the wheels or whatnot. And so that doesn't quite give it the authentic feel that you would get in a game with a pitcher. I do want to recommend the hip stick. The hip stick, this is a not as well-known piece of equipment, training equipment. It was actually developed by David Munoz. David played with me. We were teammates in high school, and David and I played together in high school, and we go way back. back. And I don't get paid for this endorsement. I just really like the hip stick idea. And it really, if you go to hip stick, I believe it's hip stick hitting or hip stick batting, but if you look it up, you'll see it. And it goes into getting it makes the hips and the lower half rotate effectively. It really is good for lower half rotation, which to me could be a great piece to a hitting or batting practice routine, along with a tee, the hip stick. I think could be a good use because it really makes the hitter, it really forces the hitter to get their hips involved and rotate through. Really where I think this is big is the inside pitch clearing the hips. Getting to an inside pitch, one of the main reasons that hitters can't get to the inside corner of a pitch or they get jammed is they don't clear their hips. Their hips don't rotate quickly and fast enough and kind of to a point where they can get that bat and the barrel to the ball. They end up missing it. They swing over the top, or they get jammed and they get, their hands get all buzzed real bad by the vibration of an inside pitch. But nonetheless, the hip stick, I recommend the hip stick. It's not a cheap thing, but I think it's something that would last. If you took care of it, could last for years. I want to say they have it priced at about like $150, but the hip stick's a good idea, especially for those hitters that just have bad hips, bad hip movement rotation. They're kind of all arms or their legs aren't really involved. That can be a really good piece of training equipment. A whiteboard, a drawing board to show players movements for where they should go on certain plays, backing up, the movement, the defensive flow on certain plays. Of course, chalk talks and boards have been around in football and basketball forever and ever. Baseball, I think this is not a bad idea when you need it to have out there a mini board, maybe something that's like a 2-foot by 2-foot board that you can take with you in your car, you can bring out to the practice, and you go out there and you can show the players, this is where you're going to position here, and just show them on that. Sometimes it's hard for them to see and visualize the entire field or the flow of the defense, their position and their teammates, the flow. Sometimes it's hard to see it when it's out on the field because the field's fairly large. It's not always easy to see the whole field from where they're at, especially, from any position, unless you're the catcher, which everything's kind of out in front of you now. But I think showing it on a whiteboard, showing the flow, like, hey, if the ball's hit here, we're going here, we're backing up here, we're going to slide this. So this is the relay. This is how we're going to set this up. Or if a ball is hit to this area, we're going to have the first baseman come here, the second baseman's going to come around, the pitcher's going to cover first, and kind of show that. Kind of just show it. This isn't something you're going to do a lot of, nor should you spend a lot of time going over it. But I do think the players to visualize, to see it, is a really good way to do it. If you can show it on a video, like a YouTube video, if you can find a clip of a play, a defensive shift, movements that are happening for a certain thing that maybe your team's struggling with or you want them to learn, you can show it to them, you can send it to them, maybe send it to their parents to have them watch it or show it. It's a little hard on an iPad or a computer at practice, but if you can get some type of screen where they can see it, that's a good way to do it. But I like the good old-fashioned board, just drawing up, say, hey, on this, we're going here. If this happens, if the ball's hit here, we're going to all kind of, and you can show the different positions moving and kind of draw some arrows to where they should be. Again, this is not a fix-all, not the magic bullet, but it is nice for players to see that visualization, like, oh, I got to be there, and it gives them a nice way to kind of see it all in one spot. Another thing I'd recommend, this has nothing to do with strategy, but that helmet mouth guard. You're seeing the major league hitters with the helmet guard that comes off. It's not the full mouth guard, although, hey, that's not a bad idea. But I think all all baseball players should have the mouth guard. There was a guy, I believe it was Terry Steinbach, old A's catcher. I believe I want to say it was him, and some of you all know probably exactly who I'm talking about or who the player was back in the late 80s, early 90s that had that. And Mike Trout's doing it. And a lot of these hitters now have that kind of partial mouth guard that kind of comes off. I recommend hitters have this at a minimum. Some leagues I know are requiring mouth face protection. The whole cage type thing can be a little problematic for visual and just, that, I don't know. I think if you get the mouth guard covered and it gets the cheekbone, especially on the pitch side, on the pitcher side of the hitter, I think that can be huge. I think that will be fairly sufficient for most injuries when it comes to that face thing. I think that's not a bad idea. Now, some of you might be saying, Coach Bo, we got to toughen these kids up. Yeah, okay. Getting kids hit in the face is not going to toughen them up. That's going to get them to quit baseball. If you want them to get a little tough, they can get hit by a pitch in the arm or the back. Hey, hustle it down. Hey, be tough. No whining about it. You got hit by a pitch, a little bruise. But when it comes at a face, that's some serious stuff right there. That's going to be, I've seen Heath multiple times laying in the grass, laying on the dirt because of injuries to the face, of course. One was a bat, a couple times it was baseballs, but nonetheless, it's not pretty. So that helmet guard, I'd recommend you have that, and I know most do. I think that should just be an automatic. I don't think we need to go the full cage requirement. I'm not against it, but I think just having definitely that cheek and mouth area covered is a big thing. And I don't think it's going to hurt the hitters at all. And I think I would be an advocate if I were you. I'll be an advocate of everybody having that on their helmet. It doesn't really add much cost to the helmet either. All right, the J-band, the Jaeger band. It's prescribed as kind of put forward as a strengthening, a shoulder strengthening, elastic tubing. There's a lot of varieties now. There's other options, not just the J-band. That's the most well-known. The thing I have, and I've owned many a J-bands and used them for years and years and years, and I'm a big fan of the J-band for a couple of things, but I'm not as big a fan inherently because there's a huge flaw in elastic tubing when it comes to consistency of resistance. The resistance consistency is flawed in elastic tubing because, as you all know, if you pull on elastic tubing, when you initially pull, it's easy, but as you get to the end of that pull, it becomes very resistant, very tight. It's a lot harder, and that's not how baseball works. The baseball in your arm and things, and just really in general, the resistance is going to be pretty consistent. For example, like a barbell or a dumbbell. The dumbbell doesn't weigh more at the bottom of the bicep curl than it does at the top. I'm not saying it's not harder at one part of the movement. Sometimes it is. Of course, like people that are familiar with like bench press, that initial spot, they call it a sticking point, I think is kind of a sticking point about a few inches off the chest. Yeah, that's probably harder to lift the weight there than maybe at the top. Or what I'm talking about is the weight. The resistance isn't any different. That's more of a positioning thing with your arms and stuff. So you're in a different type of position that makes it more challenging in those examples. But what I'm talking about is the flaw in the resistance consistency of the J-band. Now, I think it works great for stretching. I would advocate all players have elastic tubing if they can get it, or at least a team to have a couple of these. I'm a big fan of elastic tubing for stretching, and another purpose that I love it for, and if you showed up to the pitching webinar, we talked about this. I think it's a great benefit for that. So if you want more on that, I can get you that pitching webinar. You can purchase that. But I did talk about that. I don't think it's fair that I had people, I have a lot of coaches that signed up for that and got that I can't just give it away here when they pay for that. But there's another use that I really like for pitchers with the J-band. Really like it. In fact, I even more so than just the stretching. I do like it for the stretching purposes, the mobility purposes of the arm. We used to have, back in the day, you'd have other players help stretch the other, like they would help stretch the other player, their teammate's arm. They would like kind of hold it back. You get rid of that whole thing. You don't need another player to manipulate the stretch. You use a J-band or another type of elastic tubing, and it'll do the stretching for you. So you don't need to have one player stretching while the other player does the stretching. In other words, you can get twice the productivity out of it. So I do like the J-band elastic tubing for those two things. I'm not a fan of it with the resistance. And we've talked about that at length, so I'm not going to go any more into that. But here's the one thing to keep in mind with the training equipment. I'm going to hit on a few more training equipment, training things, products that you can get. We're going to go into a second part next week on this. Keep in mind, this is the operating system that you need to have. Here at 80/20, we're big on the operating system, not just kind of the one-offs. It's things that can really help you as a coach go out there and handle any situation. So if somebody comes to you and says, hey, what about this piece of equipment? Or you see a piece of equipment or training equipment and you're trying to assess it, here's how you should look at it, in my opinion. Anything that makes the game a little more challenging, but does not remove the authenticity of the game. There are a lot of things out there. There are a lot of training devices and things that, one, don't make it any harder, but if they do make the game or the skill development a little more challenging, they remove a lot of the authenticity. So it all goes back to training equipment, drills, everything goes back really as a core of it is authenticity. You're training for a baseball game. Everything that we're doing is training for a baseball game. Now, we do talk about team culture massively on here, and that's training for life. What I'm talking about here is training for the game. Why do we train for the game in ways that don't look like the game? So you have to ask yourself, is this training equipment going to replicate the game, or how close does it replicate what the hitter's going to see in a game, what the pitcher's going to do in a game, what the infielder's going to do in a game, what the outfielders are going to do in the game? It's important that you keep this operating system, this mindset, this paradigm. When you analyze any training equipment or drill, it's got to be, what's the authenticity? How close does this represent the game? And I like equipment that challenges the game or forces players to get to a better position. Like the hip stick forces hitters to use their hips in a better way, a more efficient way, and incorporate their hips when they might not have been before. Because if they don't do it correctly, they're not going to make contact with the ball, and thus they're getting instant feedback, and it's going to force them. And you can do games with it. You can challenge them. You can do some gamification with it. So you want training equipment that forces players to do something that physically they don't really want to do it. So it forces them to feel what it should feel like, kind of forces them into certain, like I talked about that tip with the J-band, it forces pitchers into, and I was on the pitching webinar, that forces pitchers into the correct position. The same thing with the hip stick and other things. Use equipment that can force players into the correct position, because just telling them, hey, you got to do this, or you got to be here with your glove, or you got to be here with your swing, telling them doesn't always get it there. But when they feel it, that can be a big difference maker. And when they start to have to feel it and they're forced to feel it and do it for an excessive amount of reps, or I should say a lot of reps, now you're starting to build much better habits. Sometimes we got to manipulate the environment for them to get that feel and to get them there much faster. And that's where training equipment can come in handy. Also, it makes it more challenging. Training equipment can make it more fun. So that's the paradigm that we want to use when it comes to training equipment. So next week, I'll hit on a couple more. I'm going to share with you a couple more recommendations when it comes to training equipment. Let's jump into the process real quick. And this is going to be a quick hit on this process. A huge benefit of having a process that we haven't talked about yet on this podcast is that it gives players a routine, a process that they can anchor to, such as a hitting process, a pitching process between pitches, a hitting process between pitches, an infielder's process between pitches, essentially a standard operating type of procedure. The benefit is that it gives players something to anchor their thoughts to and gives them something positive or productive, or at least at a minimum neutral, to anchor their thoughts to. And thus it keeps their thoughts from going down a negative rabbit hole or off to negative things. It keeps it out of the negative realm. And they say like idle hands is a devil's playground. Idle minds is not good. Idle minds is not a good place for kids. It's not a good place for a lot of people. And it's definitely not a good place for baseball players out there. Idle minds is not good. And this is something we haven't hit on. And this is something you probably don't hear much, but I think this part of it is so underrated. This is huge. It gives players something positive, productive, or at a minimum neutral to anchor their thoughts to between pitches. When they're hitting, they're not up there thinking 1,000 thoughts before the next pitch. When they're on the mound, they're not thinking, oh, don't walk this guy. Oh, don't, hey, throw a strike. Or at the plate, they're not thinking about, hey, don't get hit by the pitch, or I don't want to get hit, or man, don't strike out. There's going to be thoughts in the hitter's head unless they're a monk and they've studied Eastern Zen meditation their whole life, which isn't going to be the case, right? Why not anchor those thoughts to something a little more positive, a little more productive, and at minimum neutral? Give players a process, a routine, something that they do. The old Nomar Garcia Parr used to undo his gloves and unstrap his batting gloves, and pitchers have certain routines. If you watch a major leaguer, they'll take a deep breath. A lot of them, they'll stare at their bat. Each player you have, each pitcher, I would start with hitters and pitchers and infielders. They should each have a routine between pitches, and this forces them to be present. This forces them to be mindful and present to what they're doing, and it makes them really focus on this routine. It really keeps them focused, and the routine should actually be a positive, productive type of routine, like deep breath, etc., focus, maybe a positive comment to themselves. So having a process between pitches, or even before games, this is big. Before games, having a routine before the game, a pregame routine, it gives players a process to follow along with mentally, to stay with, to be present with, so they're not all over the place, rather than just sitting around daydreaming about negative thoughts that might creep into their mind about the game, about the next at-bat, about that current at-bat, or the next pitch. All right, time for our last segment in this episode. Time to learn from the LA Dodgers what not to do when coaching up our lineup and our hitters. The Dodgers are terrible right now with their two-strike adjustment, their two-strike plan, their two-strike approach at the plate. Here's a big red flag when you're a coach and you're coaching, and it's fascinating because the Dodgers analyze everything under the sun. I mean, they literally are probably factoring in the moon's atmospheric density into their equation on player production. They literally will have terabyte after terabyte after terabyte from every game they play. They break down every single thing, and they have this massive flaw that just shocks me, but we can learn from it, and something we should definitely not do, and you will have a much more productive lineup this way. The old school hitting lineup would be like Choka, put the ball, Rod Carew, Tony Gwynn, those players. Some of you are old enough to remember Rod Carew Carew, but Tony Gwynn. If you're not, go watch these guys. Go watch Rod Carew hit. Rod Carew, productivity-wise, was way overrated productivity-wise, but he had a high batting average. He got a lot of hits, but he wasn't driving the ball. Like, he wasn't getting extra base hits by the bunches. He was hit a single. And we all know singles are far less valuable than a double and a home run. Not that we should be swinging for the fence, but batting average is a very flawed stat in two massive ways. And that's why the Dodgers are good, because I know in their front office, they don't ever mention the stat batting average because it's been debunked why we shouldn't use it. I know it's part of the game. I grew up with batting average. Every once in a while, I'll slip that in, sometimes into a conversation on accident, but batting average is so flawed. One, it leaves out walks, massive flaw right there. Two, it factors every hit as the same weight for every hit. So a single is worth the same as a double, is worth the triple as a home run, and that inherently is a massive flaw. You can't use that stat because it's got two massive flaws. It doesn't value walks at all. Walks aren't even factored in, and we know getting on base and getting walks and having hitters up there that are not just swinging at everything is massively valuable. Getting on base is a big deal, especially the patience and letting the next guy in the lineup do their thing. And counting a single is the same weight, giving the same amount of credit to a single as you would a double. Of course, that's definitely not a way. You never run any business like that. You never run anything in life valuing and assessing something that way. But the old school approach, the old school get a single approach, and I'm going to tie this all together here, is actually a good approach with two strikes. You have to swing a little less aggressive. And this is the big red flag I see with the Dodgers. Almost every guy in their lineup to a player swings just as aggressively with two strikes as they do with less than two strikes. This is a huge red flag. If you're a coach and your team and your players or player, your kid is swinging consistently, game in and game out, at bat after at bat, if they are swinging as aggressively, as hard as they are with less than two strikes as they are with two strikes, that's a big red flag. With less than two strikes, they should be swinging 100%. Not over swinging, but not under swinging. Swing hard. Better to swing through it and miss it than hit a little dinker and get out. It's because you have more pitches after that. But when you get to two strikes, you don't have another chance. If you swing aggressive and you miss, you're out. You're on the bench. Your team has another out on the scoreboard. You have cost your team. These hitters I see on the Dodgers taking massive aggressive rips consistently. The reason I say consistently is because with two strikes and a pitcher makes a mistake right down the middle, belt high fastball, yeah, we should probably put a good swing on that. That should be an aggressive swing. That should be swung at pretty well, right? But with two strikes, you cannot swing 100% at everything because you have to protect a much bigger zone. You're not looking at a hitting zone now. You're looking to protect the strike zone. You're not looking at your hit zone, your meatball zone, the zone you're with less than two strikes. You're looking at that zone. You're looking for pitches in a zone that you can hit. The hitter can hit pretty well. They can hit line drives, hard one bounce ground balls, one hop ground balls to the infield, doubles in the gap, maybe a home run, but they're looking for pitches that they can hit hard with less than two strikes. With two strikes, you got to protect the strike zone sometimes. Well, not sometimes, but maybe every other at bat, or maybe a couple at bats in a row. It depends. The pitchers aren't always perfect and they make mistakes. But my point is this: those pitches on the fringe, those pitches that are just an inch off the strike zone, an inch out of the strike zone, which very well could be called a strike, are not necessarily, or more likely than not, pitches that the hitter should be swinging 100% aggressive at because their location doesn't facilitate that. You really just got to reach out, maybe foul it off, maybe put it in play, because with two strikes, if you miss it, you're inherently out, right? You're out. You're on the bench. You've cost your team an out. But if you foul it off, you're still up there. If you put it in play, the other team might make an error. Now, that's not a good approach with less than two strikes. That's not going to produce more runs. But with two strikes, I see the Dodgers up there, and they don't change their swing aggressiveness consistently. There are times where the hitter will shorten up and just put it in play. Freddie Freeman does a decent job of this. But for the most part, overall, you wouldn't see a difference. You can't really see a difference unless you're really looking closely at their less than two strike approach and two strike approach. And as a coach, if your hitters look the same, if their swings overall look similar in terms of aggressiveness with two strikes as they do with less than two strikes, that's a huge red flag, a massive red flag that they're not adjusting their approach with two strikes. They need to go back to what I was talking about just a minute ago, kind of that old school. That's when you want to go more Rod Carew, Tony Gwynn. I thought Rod Carew, Tony Gwynn should have been less of their put the ball in play with less than two strikes. But I'll tell you what, that approach with two strikes, that's the approach you want to have up there. You can cover a wider zone. You can put more balls in play. You can foul off more pitches that way. You can extend the at-bat that way. And the Dodgers are up there. They're not really, it doesn't look like they're extending at-bats. They're just swinging. They're swinging for home runs with two strikes on pitches that are not home run pitches. In fact, there's a very small location where hitters should, first off, they probably shouldn't be swinging for home runs. You should be looking at hard doubles at best. And the home runs will come. But the Dodgers are looking, trying to hit hard doubles and home runs on pitches that are like pitcher's pitches with 2 strikes. And in no way are they really going to have any consistency with that. So big red flag I see with them, and something to keep an eye on as a coach. If your hitter swings look the same with 2 strikes as they do with less than 2 strikes, overall, there's a big red flag. And, I love the Dodgers. That's my team. But, hey, I'm going to call a spade because at the end of the day, I should say, you are my team, the 80-20 baseball team here, that all of you showing up, I'm just trying to give you the truth and give you that extra little advantage, that extra big advantage in some cases to help you be a much better coach. And speaking of which, I look forward to being back here next week. I'm going to go over a couple more equipment things, and I may have the episode interview ready to go. It's time to get into interview season. Got some really good interviews lined up, so you want to make sure you stay tuned in. Even though a lot of you are moving kind of into that off season, into the summer and things, this is where you really start to really compound your baseball knowledge and coaching knowledge as we move forward. So until then, take care of your health, take care of your families, your inner circle, take care of your friends, your family, your health, so you can take care of all the aforementioned people. Take this information and go apply it, go use it, go put it out there. Don't let it just sit there in your mind and listening. Put it into action. And until next week, adios.
This has been the 80-20 Baseball Masterclass. Take it to the field.